Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor for the MEG program. I welcome you to my session. For those who are attending this online, let me remind you that this session is specifically designed for the course code MEG-01, which is titled British Poetry. Hence, the aspects discussed here will be solely based on the official study material for the same. And as per the requests of many of our learners, this session will be recorded by me so that this will aid you in your effective preparation of the upcoming TEE. We'll be having unit-wide discussions. Towards the end of the session, we'll discuss the important questions from the entire block as well. So we have already discussed blocks 1 to 3. If interested, you may check out the playlist on MEG-1. So today we'll deal with block 4 of the course code MEG-01, which is titled British Poetry. Dear learners, this block falls under book 2 of the total of 4 books which are available for your MEG-01 preparation. Is that clear? Now shall we move on to Lycidas? Yes, good that you responded. So dear learners, trust me, Lycidas is also very important from your TEE perspective, because very often if there comes a question on Lycidas, it is expected that you would certainly choose the question and you will write effectively. Why is that so? This is because Lycidas is comparatively a familiar poem. Why is this a familiar poem? That is because during your BA days, you would have studied what an elegy is. It is a compulsory topic. All of you must have studied what an elegy is. And 4 of the greatest examples of elegy include Lycidas by John Milton. Don't you remember? Yes. So, just give me a minute. I'll give you a brief introduction to Lycidas. So, as you know, Lycidas is an elegy, and we already discussed what an elegy is. Elegy is a poem that laments the death of a person. So, here, who is the person whose death is lamented? Okay, that's a tricky question. Yes. If you look at the real person, it is Edward King. In the particular poem, it is Lycidas. Okay. So, in a way, we can say that this character Lycidas is a stand-in for Edward King. Am I making sense to you? So, Edward King was a friend of John Milton. We will deal with that when we discuss the study material as such. Right now, I'll try to give you an introduction. That is, this work is written a few months after the death of Edward King. And always remember, whenever you answer Lycidas, always mention what a pastoral elegy is. Right? Lycidas is a pastoral elegy. Okay. Pastoral poem we already studied. It's about the rural life and things like that. Pastoral elegy would be an elegy poem that is used to memorize the death, written using a pastoral setting. Alright, it is a pastoral elegy. Remember to mention the key terms in your answer sheet. I suppose I told you. If not, let me tell you now. That is, whenever you frame your answers, may that be for your assignment or for your examination, primarily for your examination, because unless you write the keyword, it would be difficult for you to score. It is not about filling the papers. Many of the students do ask me, how many pages should we write? See, primarily, I don't think you have any word limit mentioned for this particular paper. If I remember it right, for MEG-1, there is no word limit mentioned. But remember, the questions are for 20 marks. So, ideally, at least there must be a long essay presented in your answer sheet. At least 4 to 5 pages long. But apart from the length, it is the content that matters. By content, I am referring to the keywords. So, if you are writing a question on Lycidas, if you haven't mentioned pastoral elegy, that would be a great lack, right? If you haven't mentioned Edward King, or if you haven't mentioned what an elegy is. All these come under the introductory paragraph ideally, right? So all such key points must be mentioned. Now how do you know the key points? I'll make sure that I mention all the key points in class. All right, at least I'll tell you this is important, you'll have to study that. Okay, even if you don't attend my session also, once you read the textbook you'll understand which are the key points. All right, and if you look at the previous question paper discussion of mine, the important questions that I have put online, you have an idea regarding the important aspects. Is that clear? Yes, good. So about the poem, this first appeared in the year 1638. Okay, so this was basically a collection of elegies. So this collection of elegy published in the year 1638 is titled Gesta Edorado King Naufrago. So if you are writing this name, you need to make it correct. Okay, if you are not confident, you can skip it. Like you can write this appeared in a 1638 collection of elegies, full stop. Okay, I think that would be a better choice. If you are writing the title, you should make sure that you write the correct spelling. It would be great if you could write the title, of course. That would be an important point anyway. Yes, we already know that this particular elegy commemorates. That term commemorate, it would be ideal if you can write that also. Commemorates the death of Edward King. Who was Edward King? He was a friend, we know. To be very specific, he was a college mate of Milton. College mate would mean he was a classmate, perhaps at Cambridge. He died in a shipwreck. He probably drowned in a shipwreck in the year 1637. So it is said that Milton volunteered or was asked to make a contribution to the collection and used the occasion to reflect on his own current emotional conflicts. What kind of conflicts? Specifically about poetry. So Edward King, who like Milton had apparently devoted his short life to poetry, becomes the basis for Milton's searching questions on the worth of such a life. The two poets are imagined as shepherds in the poem, and this poem follows the conventions of the classical pastoral setting, tending the arts of poetry and Milton's lament in such a situation. Hence it becomes a pastoral elegy. And a quick mention regarding the important characters here. You can see the shepherd Lycidas, Phoebus the pilot, and also another speaker. Okay, 5 major characters can be seen. So the shepherd is the primary speaker for the majority of the poem. It is about him singing the grief for his dear friend. Okay, and the friend in the poem is whom? This is a tricky question. I would like to see whether you'd answer. Who's the friend who died in this particular poem? Is it Edward King or is it correct? Correct. I'm so happy that you understood. Yes, within the poem it is Lycidas, but in real life the real character is Edward King. Okay, so the next character here is Lycidas. He is the subject of the speaker's eulogy. So Milton's stand-in for Edward King is Lycidas. Now comes an interesting character, Phoebus. I'll take a minute to ask you, do you have any idea who Phoebus is? Actually, you know this person. That is why I'm taking a minute to hear from you. Phoebus, yes. You have a mention of Phoebus on page, what is the page number? 32. Okay, let me ask you, are you familiar with the Greek mythology? In Greek mythology, you have many gods, alright? So, one such god is the Greek god of sun, music, and poetry. You might have heard of his name, Apollo. Have you heard of Apollo? This is the same person. That is why I've been asking you, do you know Greek mythology? Yes. Okay, great that you have heard of Apollo. So this Phoebus is another name for Apollo. To be very specific, this is Apollo's Roman name. Okay. So why does Apollo appear in this context? This is just to console the speaker. Why does he console the speaker? It is because the speaker is lamenting. Why is he lamenting? He is lamenting the death of whom? Lycidas. Okay, so he comes to console. That is where he appears. So this lament goes on to line 76 when Phoebus interrupts the lament to console the poet. Okay, so line 76 to 84 are given in your study material. Make sure that you have an idea. When you see a line starting with Phoebus, you should be having an idea that, oh, this is from? Is it from the Nativity Ode? No, it is from Lycidas. So, angane you should be able to distinguish, and you should be able to at least find your own tricks of attempting questions based on annotations. So, this then becomes the basis for consolation, which ends with the poet's celebration of Lycidas' life and fame. After consolation, the poet celebrates the fame of Lycidas. What is significant about the consolation is that it shifts registers. That is, from classical allusion to Christian mythology, there happens a shift that is evident. So, basically what happens, okay, just give me a minute. Basically what happens in Lycidas is that Milton uses the story of a shepherd grieving for his friend to explore his feelings after the death of his friend Edward King. The poem begins with the shepherd collecting leaves for Lycidas' funeral and calling for the world to mourn his loss. Okay? A parade of characters from Greek mythology arrive to comfort the shepherd, but he continues to grieve. One important character is Phoebus. Who is Phoebus? Will you answer now? Now you know, right? Correct. Remember the spelling, okay? Yes, correct spelling. Apollo. And speaking about the characters, we already discussed 3 characters, that is shepherd, Lycidas, Phoebus. There is the pilot, okay? Phoebus, it's given in textbook also, the other name of Apollo, Phoebus, okay? Yes, the 4th major character is the pilot. He arrives at the end of the funeral procession. Whose funeral procession? Lycidas' funeral procession. And towards the end of the poem, we can see that there is a second speaker as well. In the last 8 lines of the poem, the shepherd, who's a primary speaker, falls silent, and a new speaker takes his space or place. That is the second speaker. And in the final stanzas, he finds consolation in the promise of Christian resurrection and leaves for new pastures, which means new beginning. Okay, so this is what happens in the poem. And we can say that if you look at line 173 of Lycidas, okay, this is given on page number 33 of your study material. The biblical aspects are much evident here. The last line here is an allusion to the biblical story of the miracle of Jesus walking on water. Is there anybody who's familiar with the story? See, in the Holy Bible, there are many examples and stories, right? One such incident is Jesus walking on water, and we know the incident what happened with St. Peter and the discussion, etc. We don't have time to explain all these things. It seems like just one person knows Okay, so if you're not aware of this, just Google and see the miracle of Jesus walking on water. The poem goes on to describe the heavenly bliss that is Lycidas' fortune after death. That is, if you have faith, anything is possible. If you have faith, nothing is impossible. That is what is mentioned in this miracle. And remember, this poem is tightly interwoven with Christian and classical elements. Milton is drawing on two traditions of allegorization of the shepherd. That is the classical tradition in which shepherds are poets, and the poem thus represent both poet and religious guides. Like the Nativity Ode, there is also a connection with the life of the poet, and it is in envisioning the poet as a combination of these roles that Milton is most comfortable. So this is a part of the middle paragraph of page number 33 of the study material. I told you this is important, and I believe Lycidas is easy for you to study because most of the things you already know. You just have to study the analysis part and some stanza structures maybe. So I suppose it will be easy for you to study Lycidas. So what about the themes mentioned? See, the poem weaves several themes together. 1. Mortality as inevitable. 2. The futility of poetic ambitions. 3. The transience of worldly pleasures in the face of mortality. 4. The guarantee of spiritual immortality with Christianity, and the need to promote this as a superior form. So if you have taken a break and then come back to study for MA, these some words might be tough for you, but if you understand the meaning of these words and if you understand the concept with respect to the context, then it would be easy for you. Okay, nothing is easy at the very first reading. You will have to read, reread and revise, and then you will understand. Try not to mug up, because if you do rote learning, by rote learning I am referring to by hearting these things, right? So if you forget one word, then everything gets at a seizure, or maybe everything stops at that moment. So if you know the meaning, maybe you can rephrase it and also write, right? So I think that would be a better way to study. Am I making sense to you? Why is it so silent? My humble suggestion is that if you are making notes, please make sure that you study that also, because I have come across many learners and I feel really sorry for them. I have seen very attractive notes, colors, etc. They even make mind maps and things like that, but they fail to study these. Do you understand? They invest their time in preparing things, but they fail to study it. So dear learners, smart work is also important. So the importance is to study rather than making. So while I say make lecture notes or make notes or try to make some scribbles of important dates, etc., what I mean is to help you out, not to invest your time in just preparation. Okay, smart work is equally important. You should find some time to actually study that. The dates would be a bit tough, the titles would be kind of tough. You don't have to remember the line numbers, that would be too much, but you should be able to identify this line is part of this poem, at least those given emphasized to. Like right now I mentioned line 173, right? Okay, so such things. Though the dear might of him that walked the waves. So if you know at least the basic overview of the poem, if you see this line, you will understand. Okay, that is one other tip that I would give you. If at all one question would seem unfamiliar to you, especially the annotation question, you will have to choose 2 annotation questions. So if at the first glance you find that question strange, and don't panic, don't be tensed. I suppose there are 10 marks allotted for an annotation question. Okay, so one tip that I would give you is to read the lines. You have enough and more time. 3 hours are there. Okay, and you just have to write 5 questions, I believe. Yeah, 20 marks, yes. So 2 annotation and 4 essays. I suppose that is the question pattern. If you have doubt, I have prepared a video on how to attempt the exam. Okay, so there I have explained all these in detail, and thank you for your feedback, for telling me that that was very useful, and I was surprised to see the new batch also referring to that. Okay. And as I was saying, annotation is important because at least 20 marks. Okay, so you have options. So yes, as I mentioned, the tip is to read. Even if at the very first glance you find it strange, you didn't understand, don't panic. Okay, it is annotation. Read the lines and just go through the major poems you have studied. I'm very sure that there will be some clue. Okay, there will be some clue in the lines. And see, even if you don't write the entire expected context or the correct answer, even if you identify the poem and the poet, you can make your own, at least an introductory paragraph, right? If you understood this is from Milton, or if you understood this is from Lycidas, it is half done. At least you can write something. Always write relevant points, as I mentioned earlier. It is not about the line number, the page number, or it's not about how much you write, it's about how you write. Alright, and handwriting also you need to take care of. There are many problems seen. Either it is not legible, okay, you are not able to read it properly. The other issue could be very enhanced, huge size handwriting. So what happens is that you won't be given additional booklets. Okay, it is within one booklet that you will have to write your entire paper. Now you must be wondering, oh, what will I do if I don't? Oh, very often nobody crosses that border. That is the reason. You have 26 pages to write, plus 27 and 28. 27 is workspace and 28 is your instruction page. Alright, don't worry, you won't be writing more than that. Even if you write 5 pages for essays, it would be 25, 25. Still you have one extra page, right? So one thing that you should notice, that you shouldn't waste pages. Like, you shouldn't write things and cut it off. Then you will be running short of pages. Okay, so for that you should be prepared, or else think before you write. Okay, and don't waste too much of time, but I would say you have enough and more time, 3 hours for just 5 questions. It's fine. So if you are prepared, you can write effectively. So is that clear so far? Remember, the complex themes and narrative movement of the poem render its structure somewhat mysterious. You can say it has a mysterious structure, and we can say there are 2 ways of understanding the movements in the poem. Which are the 2 ways? One, as being composed of 2 movements with 6 sections each that seem to mirror each other, and 2 is composed of 3 movements that run parallel in pattern. Okay, the separation of Christian and classical and all such things are mentioned on page number 33. Make sure that you do a detailed reading. So when you analyze the structure of Milton's Lycidas, the epigram labels Lycidas as a monody. Monody, what do you mean by that? A lyrical lament for one voice. Mono, one. Okay. But the poem has several voices, including the main narrator, who is interrupted by Apollo, Phoebus, then Camus, the river Cam or Cambridge, and the pilot. Okay. All such details are given, and finally remember, a second narrator appears for only the last 8 lines to bring a conclusion. And there is an ottava rima. Ottava rima, if you remember, has a sestet and a couplet. Okay. The poem contains the irregular rhyme and meter, which is characteristic of the Italian canzone form. Okay, canzone is essentially a polyphonic lyrical form. You have details given here. So the sense of sorrow and bewilderment is intensified by the line's refusal to be confined to consistent lengths. Okay, there is no consistent length or specific rhyme scheme even also. by referring to the poem as monodic, then Milton might have meant that the poem should be regarded more as a story told completely by one person as opposed to a chorus. That must be what he meant by that. As I mentioned, never forget to mention pastoral elegy. The first thing that should come to your mind when you hear of Lycidas should be that it is a pastoral elegy, a genre which is initiated by Theocritus. Okay, and it was put into use and popularity by Virgil and Spenser. Remember, Spenser's Shepherd's Calendar was more or less an influence on John Milton. So these also employ the irregular rhythm and meter of an Italian canzone, and Lycidas also exhibits the influence of Pindaric odes. Okay, just keep that in mind. It would be great for you to read the detailed overview. I have completed almost all the main points I've explained in class, but now it's up to you to read the further and to understand all the key areas. So with that, we come to the end of unit 20. We dealt with this block in detail primarily because both the poems discussed on the morning of Christ's nativity and Lycidas are important with respect to your TEE preparation. Okay, with respect to these poems, questions would be there. We will discuss the important questions and the previous TEE questions towards the end of this block. Alright, I suppose that will do. Now, from Milton's literary output, we have to study 4 other poems, that is L'Allegro and Il Penseroso and the sonnets. By sonnets, I am referring to sonnet numbers 19 and 23. We will deal with that in our next session.